Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to this virtual event with Majors and Quinn. My name is Steph. I'm a bookseller here at Majors and Quinn. For those who don't know, we are an independent bookseller in uptown Minneapolis. If it is your first time viewing one of our virtual events, welcome. We're so happy to have you. And if you are returning for a second or third or whoever knows how many, event. Welcome back. We're so glad that you've joined us again. We really appreciate your continued support of our program. Tonight, I am thrilled to introduce Jack Zipes, who is presenting Rediscovered children's books from Little Mole and Honey Bear Press, which he'll talk about in a minute. Um, Jack Zipes is a professor emeritus of German and comparative literature at the University of Minnesota. In addition to his scholarly work, he is an active storyteller in public schools and has written fairy tales for children and adults. In his happy retirement, he founded a small publishing house called Little Mouse and Honey Bear. His new mission is life is to unbury dead and neglected authors of fantasy and to create conditions for a better world. So before I hand it off to Jack, I would love it if anybody watching would sound off in the comments, tell us where you're tuning in from. And just so you know, at the end of the hour, we'll have about 15 minutes for a Q&A if you have any questions that you want to ask Jack. I will be coming back for that. But now I will hand it off to the man of the hour. So Jack, it is all you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Steph. So before I begin talking, I would like to thank Annie Metcalf for providing me this opportunity to talk about my books, and of course Majors and Quinn, which is one of the best and most unusual independent bookstore in Minneapolis. I also want to thank Victoria Peterlin and Jennifer Trebusovsky for the advice that they've given me in publishing the books and working on the projects that I've done. I also want to thank my wife, who ordered me many years ago to get rid of all the 10,000 books in my library when I retired from the University of Minnesota. She told me that if I didn't obey, I would be expelled from the house, and I'll tell you more about this later on and why that's so important. I don't want to really give any type of lecture tonight. What I would like to do is basically provide some history or background to why I founded Little Mole and Honey Bear. And then I want to talk about why it is really extremely important, I think, to look into old books or the elderly books, and to give these books a second chance to bring them back to life, because they are still relevant. And in fact, one of my theses is that if we do not pay attention to the past, we'll never and understand the past, we will not be able to move forward into the future in a way that we can really determine what our lives are going to be. So, and also I would like to end, after I do that, I would like to talk about the launch of the magic herb, and also Teddy, the refugee mouse. And I want to talk about some of the other books that I've been working on as well. And then if you have any questions about them, I will certainly try to answer them. So let me begin with the formation of, or the history of Little Mole and Honey Bear. I'll begin with just a simple statement that anybody who knows me knows that I'm sort of a flea market junkie, and also I'm addicted to secondhand bookstores and antiquarian bookstores throughout my life. That began very early when I was at Dartmouth College and finished my my degree there, my BA. And at that time, I wanted to become sort of the next great American novelist. I wanted to be a writer, but I realized after I went to Dartmouth and tried writing a few novels that perhaps I had some other talents that I should try to develop. And I went on and studied English and American and German literature at Columbia University. That was in the 1960s. And during that time, I began to take a great interest in the romantic fairy tales that the German writers in the 19th century and also American writers wrote, and began exploring these tales in depth. So I reached the point that after I received my doctorate from Columbia, I think it was in 1965, I went off to Munich and began teaching there. And I was really not sort of all that familiar with fairy tales, nor was I all that familiar with the types of fantasy books that were being published at that time. And so my time in Munich was spent doing a great deal of research and then realizing through the help of a professor from Harvard who had retired there, an Austrian woman by the name of Mariana Thalmann. And she had a big influence on me and pushed me, so to speak, to go further than she had ever gone in her numerous books. And I because of her influence, I followed in her, I wouldn't say in her footsteps, but I began exploring why fairy tales and children's literature were really not taken seriously by academics, and what the importance of these works were. So when I returned to teach at NYU in, I think it was 1967, I began focusing. I taught in the German department there, and I began focusing to a great extent once again on the German Romantics. And I also was very active in the anti-war movement at that time, so that when it ended and I was able to move from New York to Milwaukee, where I taught at the University of Wisconsin, I began an in-depth exploration and research into folklore, fairy tales, books on them, studies, psychological, political, you name it. I began doing whatever I could. And it was at this time that the woman I was living with, she was studying children's literature and children's education, and I began reading all of her books. And I also began to think about why was it that most of the anti-war movement died out in the 1970s, and people returned, mainly middle-class people, returned to the comfortable lives that they had and never thought about pursuing or understanding what was it that really brought about the Vietnam War, and not only the Vietnam War, but other wars. And it was at that point that I understood that I myself began questioning my own attitude and wanted to make some contributions, wanted to continue to change things, but realized that generally speaking, when in one's childhood, one is socialized in certain ways, that make us susceptible to, let us say, the general civilizing process, the sort of conservative civilizing process, and people fall back on that. And so I decided to, at that time, I read a good deal of Bruno Bettelheim's work on fairy tales and also Carl Jung's, and I realized that they were rather stupid and ignorant when it came to understanding children and fairy tales and literature in general. And it was at that time that I published my first book called Breaking the Magic Spell. And it was perhaps one of the first political studies of folk and fairy tales that really questioned the traditional approaches to folk and fairy tales. And that led me to a really intensive studies in different ways over the next years. And I lived in countries like France, Germany, Italy, and England for a period of 30, 40 years in learning new ideas, studying the Frankfurt School, and eventually came back to the United States, having published a fair amount of books. I came back to the United States and began, fortunately, publishing with Princeton University Press. That was approximately 2008, just about the time that I retired from the university. And Princeton, I began a series called Oddly Modern Fairy Tales. And these fairy tales were really superb fairy tales that were totally neglected. They were published approximately from 1900 to the beginning of Second World War. And I was able to work with editors at Princeton who helped me promote or publish, let us say, about 10 books that by unknown authors or known authors, but not too well known in the United States, people like Kurt Schwitters or Balach, or other writers like, for instance, one writer called John Sullivan. So all of these writers had published books in the early part of the 20th century. And so I contacted people whom I knew who might serve as editors of these books, people like Marina Warner or Maria Tata and other scholars who really were very, who really understood a great deal about these oddly modern fairy tales, are highly unusual. And so the publishing with Princeton gave me some other ideas later on in about, I would say, 2016, 2017. And I wanted at that time to really publish with another academic press, either like the University of Minnesota Press or Wayne State University Press in Detroit. And I did. I actually convinced them to publish books of Russian, a collection of Russian fairy tales, a collection also by a writer who is not too well known today, by the name of Charles Godfrey Leland. And these were books that I had not been really acknowledged as important, relevant books with regard to the fairy tale tradition and also with regard to social political problems. So both the University of Minnesota and the University of Wayne State University said that they would, agree to do one book a year with me if I wanted to do that. And at this point, since I was not getting any younger and was in a hurry to publish, and now I'm coming back to my wife and the books that I managed to salvage after she made me get rid of about 8,000 books. I wanted to really do about since I have a great deal of time on my hands, was no longer teaching full time, I decided to publish, or I wanted to publish books, about 3 or 4 books, either with the University of Minnesota Press or Wayne State University Press. But whatever honeymoon I had with these two publications, two publishing houses, they wouldn't allow me to do more than that. So due to my experience with printing and layouts and various things in publishing here in Minneapolis, I decided that it wouldn't be too costly to publish maybe 300 copies of a particular story. And I should, with the help of Wise Ink, which is a local editorial company here and helps you get books published, I began publishing or taking out those books that I thought the very best to start with from my different my different from let us say from different countries. A lot of these tales are tales I translated or tales that I just edited or re-edited and so on and so forth. So in 2018, I've a lot of these books, and it's a great deal of this is luck, is fortune. A lot of the books again I found in the flea markets or in antiquarian bookstores and so on and so forth. And I was able to work with an excellent layout person, graphic artist, who helped me design all of the books that I've published thus far. And the first book that I published was called The Giant Owl and Tiny Tim, and it was written and illustrated in 1922 by Christian Beermann. And Christian Beermann was totally unknown. Nobody in Germany had ever heard of him before, but I had found his books illustrated by him in a antiquarian bookstore in Munich. That was the first one that I published, and I followed that with a book in French called Jean Sans Pain. I called it Johnny Breadless, and it's a book about World War I and a young boy who loses his parents and helps a rabbit who can fly about with his ears flapping all over the place, can fly about the world, and introduces him, or I wouldn't say introduces him, lets him see what the causes of World War I were and why and how his parents lost their lives due to the greed of armies, greed of particular corporations, and so on and so forth. So I published that book also. Both of those books were published one after the other. And then I was attending a book fair here in Minneapolis, and I found another book, and that was really fascinating, and that was called Yusuf the Ostrich. And Yusuf the Ostrich was written and illustrated by Emery Kellen, and the book came out about in the 1940s. He was a Hungarian Jew who fled the Nazis and was a great political caricaturist, and wrote this book, wonderful book about an ostrich who, after he is born, wants to spend some time with his mother, and then he wants to learn how to speak and read and write. And eventually he's in North Africa. Eventually he becomes a runner, a messenger for the Allies, who were also in North Africa during World War II. And he steals the plans of the of the Nazis, and then manages to take the plans to the American allies and saves various cities from being destroyed by the Nazis. And at the end of the book, he doesn't want to be declared a hero. He just wants to go back and live with his mother, and that's how the book ends. And it's a wonderful ending. And then the other book that I published along with that was by a brother and sister by the name of Conselman, Deirdre Conselman and William Conselman. And they wrote I wrote an illustrated book called Keelan the Great. And Keelan the Great is a young boy who grows up and basically idolizes Hitler and wants to become a Nazi. And in fact, he does. He does. And the book is all about his development. And at the very end, he wants to, there's a scene in which he wants to explode the world, and the world looks at him and says, "You must be joking," and begins laughing at him. And he dies, he's transformed into an insect, and he dies because the laughter mocks him to a certain extent. And so those are the four books that have been out for some time and are rather interesting. They're basically political, but not too didactic. There's a great deal of humor to them, and they're extremely relevant, I think, to our own times. I mean, we have a lot of the same problems that the characters have in these books. What I want to talk about right now are the two books which I just published that are totally different from any of the other books that I've done. One is called Teddy, the Little Refugee Mouse by Dorothy Burroughs, written and illustrated by Dorothy Burroughs. And the other is called The Magic Herb. And I want to read briefly from the beginning of both of these books, because it'll give you a sense of the writing and also of the illustrations that appear. So this is the Teddy, the Refugee Mouse. Charles Stewart Henry Edward Richard Coeur de Lion, named Teddy for short, was a small gray mouse who lived in the basement of a house in the heart of a great city. He made his little home behind the wooden paneling in the breakfast room, and often he ran out and picked up any crumbs that had fallen from the table. At night times, he would scamper down the passage that led to the larder and the kitchen and find all kinds of delicacies very much to his taste. He had made his home very cozy and had papered his walls with pieces of newspaper, which he had pulled through his little doorway from time to time. He used to lie in his small bed and improve his mind, as he thought, by reading the news from his walls and even his ceiling, for he had papered that as well. Sometimes the news was a little disjointed because he had to tear the papers up very small indeed to get them through his front door. For instance, he would read, "The king and queen entered the royal box dooring," and this would set him dreaming. For the king and queen, he easily imagined dressed in pure gold from head to foot, with crowns upon their heads, sparkling with rubies and diamonds. But what was the royal box? And why did they enter it? And during what? For the rest of the story was torn off. He had hoped it wasn't a cruel trap like the one his father and mother had entered. Oh, he hoped not indeed. Well, to make this very short, Teddy finds out, this is 1940, that the people in his home in London are going to the country because there's a lot of bombing by the Nazis. And therefore he goes with them. He smuggles himself into a car and travels with them to the countryside. And there he meets other types of animals. And I won't spoil the rest of the story, but I will then now talk about the magic herb briefly. I'll read from it. The first part: cough, cough, cough. The whole of the little badger family stood round baby badger's bed and watched the poor little thing fighting for breath. It's whooping cough right enough, said Father Badger, looking with great concern at the baby over his glasses. We'll rub a little of this liniment on his chest, said Mother. Cough, 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 whoop, 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 went poor little baby badger. What about that magic herb, Mother? Said the eldest son, Lightfoot. Ah, said Mother, shaking her head. If it does exist, said Father, it is hidden so well that no one has ever found it. Couldn't we try, said the second son, whose name was Quick Ears. Oh, yes, let's do it, cried the youngest, who was called Bright Eyes, and who was always eager for any adventure. They say, said Father, looking mysterious, that it grows in the ruins of the old monastery up on top of the mountain of the Magic Isle. They say, went on Mother, that it is guarded by a white flame, and that the flame is seen flashing about on the island like something alive. Again, I won't tell you what happens except to say that the three brothers take a boat out to this island and try to find the magic herb, and the illustrations. The entire book is just really brilliant. The author, Dorothy Burroughs, began her career as a painter in a zoo in the 1920s, and studied and painted and sketched animals while she was hired to create posters for the zoo. And she became so angry by the way the animals were kept behind iron bars that she decided, when she began writing picture books and illustrated picture books for children in the 1930s and 40s, that she would never have human beings. She always would use metaphorically animals to represent humans, and she always believed that the animals tended to be more humane than humans are. So I fell in love with Dorothy Burroughs and all her works, and there's some other books that I hope that I'm going to publish in the future. The very next two are intriguing. One is called a republication of Maurice Drouin's book called Tistu. It's about a young boy who's born with green fingers, so that whenever he touches the ground, he can sort of generate flowers or trees or plants and so on and so forth. And his father owns a weapons factory, and unknown to the father, his son really dislikes the fact that he's destroying the environments and that he's contributing to wars and so on, manages to create plants and trees and so on that block the manufacture of these weapons. I won't tell you again what happens. That book will be out hopefully right before Christmas. And the other book I do want to mention before I stop, and if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. The other book is a retranslation. I retranslated Bambi. Mainly, the copyright to the Bambi book expires January 1, and Princeton University Press has, with my recommendation, hired one of the most brilliant illustrators, Annika, who is, Alenka Butler, and she is brilliant illustrator, and she and I have collaborated on this book to show to what extent Walt Disney has perverted Bambi, because the book was never written for children. It's a book about how animals are destroyed and their lives are destroyed, and Bambi at the very end of the book is totally lonely. It's a story that sort of it was written in 1922, but it anticipates the Shoah in Europe, the decimation of European Jews. And so this book is extremely important, and I hope that many people will read it and reread it to children if they have children, and not allow children, well, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say not allow children to see the stupid Disney film or read the stupid Disney version, but the book will speak for itself, and I hope people will read it. So I think I've spoken long enough, and if anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
All right, thank you, Jack. And yeah, everybody sound off in the comments. If you have any questions for Jack, for the moment, I'll run through. We've got people checking in from all over the globe, which is pretty fantastic. Got Cape Cod, from Shiraz, from Boston, Minneapolis, Fargo Moorhead. Had one woman checking in from Brazil who said that she was so excited to be here and that she can't wait till they have your books translated into Portuguese, which is really lovely. Melbourne, Australia. Looks like we have a former student from your time at NYU, Jackie Hecht.
Yes.
You introduced her German literature. She says many thanks for the lifelong enjoyment. Got Washington, D.C. All right, so it looks like we've got a question from John Jameson, who says, wow, so inspiring. I was wondering if you had any books to help structure our writing for folklore and fairy tales.
To structure what?
People's writing for folklore and fairy tales.
Or any advice to how you structure?
Or any books, suggestions, or if you could just talk about structuring people's own writing.
Yeah, well, I think the best way to go about that is to obtain these books and to read them and to not to imitate them, but to see, if you wanted to write fables, it would be great just to buy a book of fables, Aesop's Fables, for instance, and to look, and this, of course, influenced Dorothy Burroughs, because she wrote, I would call them fables, I would call them, it'd be really difficult to sort of define Burroughs' books, because they're partly fairy tale, partly fable, and so on. But those are the books I would recommend reading, because it's a different way of looking at animals, and then people quite often then use forget it. Let us say metaphorically, they look at the tales of animals and are able to place them in situations that human beings might be in, and then you can move on from there. You create your own stories.
Great, yeah, thank you. Nothing popping up. I was just wondering, do you speak about some of your favorite folk tales, maybe, that you have that are particularly formative for you, maybe?
Well, I have written a book about Little Red Riding Hood, and was one of the first sort of critics to look at the book as a story of rape. It's a story of violation. and I wrote a whole book with a lot of different tales from all over the world at different times that really question the way the story has been told, and where the little girl is made responsible for her violation, for her rape. And so that particular story stays with me all the time. I mean, it was a breakthrough type of book that I wrote, and the book really was one of the first, in quotes, feminist studies. This goes back to the early 1980s, and no one up to that point had really delved into the different ways Little Red Riding Hood had been portrayed. Now there are numerous studies, essays, excellent essays. There are also amazing different ways that Little Red Riding Hood as a story has been developed in theater, like Into the Woods, or even operas, musicals, you name it. And my thesis is that since we have not resolved this whole question of violation of women, the tale will continually to be retold mimetically throughout the world. And I think I'm sort of correct.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, unfortunately. All right, we've got a couple more. One from Carroll Sibley. Just a quick one. What happened to the 8,000 books your wife wanted you to part with?
Yes, we sold them. Well, actually, yeah, I guess we did. We gave them to an auction company. I did manage to salvage 2,000. So I don't tell her that, but I did salvage. They were in the basement, and so I sneaked down there to get the particular books that I need every now and then.
Great. Jan Suzina asks, could you talk about Lewis Carroll's influence on Burroughs? Maybe discuss The Dodo and the Magic Herb.
Yeah.
Any plans to reprint Burroughs's The Little Odd Girl, which you mentioned in your note?
Yes. Yeah, that's great. Really good question. There's no doubt whatsoever that Burroughs fully knew Lewis Carroll's work. She wrote, it's not one of her best works, 2 volumes, 2 books called The Odd Girl, The Little Odd Girl, it's called. And it's maybe 4 inches by 6 inches, very small book. And the illustrations are in black and white. But there's a definite influence on her by Lewis Carroll. And it's I have another 4 illustrated books in color by her that are in the cellar, and I hope to publish them in the next year or two. They're again remarkable. Her sense of color and her subtle way of writing these tales are just amazing. I can't hear you. I can't hear. Something.
Oh, yep, you're muted.
Okay, now
I was
I
muted. I apologize. I was
Okay.
trying to cut down on feedback and didn't press that button again. I'm sorry. So one more time on my end.
Yes.
Carol Dines asks, how are fairy tales and folk tales being used to get children to think about their own lives?
Oh, that's great. Aside from my teaching at the University of Minnesota, I also, in 1995, I collaborated and founded Neighborhood Bridges, which is a storytelling program for in the inner city schools, which enable children to become storytellers of their own lives. It's a program that I developed myself. I didn't mention that in Milwaukee 30, 40 years ago, I became a storyteller in schools, and I brought that program with me to Minneapolis. And Peter Brosius, the director of the Children's Theater Company, we were friends, and he said, "I want to drag you in and let's develop a program in the education department of the theater." And that, unfortunately, because of the virus, that program finally ended. But it was 20 years or so. We worked. Every really superb teaching artists whom I trained went into schools once a week and spent 2 hours once a week for the entire school year working with children, so that they developed the capacity to write, draw, act, and do different things with their own stories. Not, I mean, we obviously read stories to them and worked with other stories, but that has been, in fact, I would say, the greatest accomplishment in my life. It's not at the university, but it's with these children who really benefited from a program like that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What a sweet thing to do. I can't imagine spending time with kids that way. It sounds like so much fun and incredible to watch them tell stories.
You learn amazing amount from them.
I'm sure. Yeah. Nick asks, he says, "Hi, Jack. Thanks for the talk. Has the publishing world changed a lot during your career in its attitude to fairy tale scholarship? And can you say what have been the biggest changes?"
Yes, definitely. I wouldn't call it an immense change, but definitely there's been a change. There are one of the foremost journals, Marvels and Tales, comes out of Wayne State University Press, Garmier at the University of Chichester. These are I'm just mentioning two. I mean, there are many others. There's a fantasy society, and I forget the name of the journal there as well. So definitely academically, one of the great things that has happened since my teaching years, going back in the 1960s, is a recognition that these genres are extremely important to understand. These are popular genres that children and adults read, listen to, see, hear, and so on and so forth. And so the scholarship is just remarkable. It's incredible how many people from different fields, from sociology, anthropology, English, and so on and so forth, write and take different approaches to try to understand how these tales play very strong socialization or influence socialization of children and adults in all countries and in different ways. And so, yeah, there has been, I wouldn't call it revolutionary, but certainly a profound change or turn in the type of let us say, books and articles and research that has been done in these fields.
Yeah, thank you. And then sort of a bridge between this and the next question from Isabella down in Brazil. She was wondering if, like, in these retellings and, or kind of investigating or, looking at these tales under a little bit closer lens now, do you have a tale that you don't think that should, like, still be told to children today? Or do all tales kind of have value and should be told going forward?
Yeah. The latter is what I would favor. I don't think anything should be censored. That you have to be careful. I mean, there is a really in the first edition of Brothers Grimm, the Grimms published a tale called "How Children Played with Slaughtering." And I won't tell it right the second, otherwise people might not be able to fall asleep tonight, but it deals with children who play with one another, slaughtering one another because they're imitating butchers in their town. And would I recommend that? Not necessarily. I might try to tell some other type of tale that does involve some gruesome aspects of life, but that's a particular tale, probably the only tale that I know that I would definitely censor.
Yeah, that sounds pretty brutal, but coming from the Brothers Grimm, they've got some dark themes to their work for sure.
Yes.
And then we've got one more question in the chat from Nita, sorry for the mispronunciation, who says, thanks for the talk, Jack. Here it's 4:08 a.m., so thank you for joining us so early in your day.
Right.
They're a bit sleepy, but their question is, what do you suggest to do with the violence sometimes found in fairy tales? So more about the censoring. You say keep it in.
Yeah, I think we have to contend with these, and we can't ignore the fact that we live in a violent world, and there are ways to tell. In my program, we did tell tales that involved violence. Like, well, you could even say Hansel and Gretel is a tale about children being abused, in the forest, and a witch trying to eat them, and so on. It's pretty grim, but that's the type of tale. It's done in a really interesting metaphorical way, so that you can try to. I wouldn't tell this tale without talking about the tale at the end, and raising questions. That's what we do in Neighborhood Bridges. If we tell a tale, we always want to listen to the children and hear what they have to say about a particular tale, and then we'll try to pursue maybe this or that, and to try to even extend their understanding of why this violence happens. But I think actually, it's a really upon us. I mean, there's so much violence that children get on the TV screens, beginning with age 1 or 2, that parents ignore and really should be held accountable if they allow their children to see these stories or films, and don't talk to the children about them and try to have a dialogue. That's the worst thing you can do, is not listen to children.
Yeah, I agree. And then kind of in the same vein, question from Tina here, who is wondering, do you have any problems trying to republish old books with themes that are pertinent now, but that maybe have a detail that may be outdated culturally or insensitive today? Do you edit stories, shy of censoring them completely?
Yeah, no, all the books that I have, and it's astonishing, I have at least 20 or 30 books lined up that I want to publish with Little Mole and Honey Bear. And they may have some faults here and there, but they're just as important or significant as the tales that are being published today. In fact, I once argued with Neil Gaiman at a conference. I said 95% of children's literature is, can I say this word? No, I can't in this interview. Dreck, okay? It stinks. It's putrid. It's not so good. Most of the films and stories and so on and so forth that children get today tend to be commercialized, commodified. And so I think we have to be aware of that in the past, that wasn't the case. Publishing wasn't about commodification. Publishing had a different role, going back many years. And so the publishing world has changed to a great extent, and all people want are the spectacular. The spectacular is what counts, and it doesn't matter whether it's a mystery or horror show or whatever it is. That's what's going on today, and I think that part of reforming the United States is to reform education, to change education so that it really enables children to tell their own stories. Again, I'll stress that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Thank you. So we'll give people, we've got a few more minutes left available. So if you have any last minute questions, throw them down there. I do want to say that earlier in the chat, I threw up Majors and Quinn phone numbers. So if you'd like to purchase one of Jack's books and, support Little Mole and Honey Bear Press, give us a call. Unfortunately, our website is down at the moment, or unable to process credit card payments. But if you call us on the telephone, you will get a very friendly bookseller who's more than happy to help you support Jack and get one of these amazing old fairy tales. Just getting a lot of thanks, Jack, in the chat for this talk tonight. It was really a pleasure. Is there anything that you'd like to touch on that you didn't think we had time for?
No, I just want to thank Majors and Quinn one more time and thank people for tuning in.
Yeah, great. All righty. So on that, thank you. It was really genuinely our pleasure. We'll have to have you back for, your next round of publishings. So we'll look forward to that. I hope everybody has a wonderful night or day, depending on where you are. So have a great day, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.